Welcome to week 4 of our Humanities 101 class. This week we're talking about war and apocalypse. You're having a number of different experiences, thinking about different aspects of war and different musical renditions of ideas of war. So far, I'm looking at the discussion board, and you guys are doing okay. There's a few people that are posting. I'd like to get some more posting going there. The discussions are great. This class is doing a great job with that. The idea of that discussion is to take all those different experiences you've had and post about it twice. And what I want you really doing, and the few people that have already posted have kind of missed this part. That's okay. Don't go back and repost. I want you taking reading number 4 and song number 4, or text number 2 and song number 2, and talking about that pairing to talk about what's going on between those two different texts. That was the idea of the pairing. So if you could discuss that in the discussion, that'd be great. I also wanted to mention the class discussion board at the top of the class talk board at the top of the Moodle page. I think it's been used 2 or 3 times, but very seldom. I just saw somebody posted yesterday. I haven't read that message yet, but nobody's really using it. The idea behind that board is that you have a space to talk with your fellow classmates and with me about issues of the class, about the assignments we've got, about the technology. That's a good place to post. It really sucks that you can't hear the music, or a good place to post, hey, I just went and found that Thief in the Night video and I watched it and it was amazing. It's a place to hold discussions about what we're doing outside of the very set questions that I have in the discussion boards. So I'd like to see you use that a little bit more. There's no requirement for it. There's no points for using that board, but it would be great for me to see how you're processing through the information of the class outside of our regular discussions. This week you have an exam. I've posted that exam. I got it up only like 2 hours late, so I thought that was pretty good. So it is up and it's running. You have until Tuesday or Monday night at 11:59 p.m. to finish that exam. I gave you an extra day because we were a day late. So make sure when you take that exam that you save 90 minutes before you start it, because you've got a time limit in the exam and you need to be able to get that exam done within that 90 minutes. Also, make sure that you've reviewed the materials just a little bit. It's not there's no need for heavy study. There's no need for memorizing things. It's just, I want to know that you know the materials. So reviewing them for a little bit before you take the exam is probably a good idea. If you haven't read any of the materials, you're probably going to struggle a little bit with some of the questions. But the point of this is to, 1, see that you're doing the reading and the study, but 2, also to use the exam to review the work we've done for the past 3 weeks as we get ready to move on to the end of the course. The exam is divided into 2 different sections, although the sections aren't apparent when you take it on Moodle. The first section is 20 questions of multiple choice questions. The answers, you pick the best answer, the one that most represents what you know, and you choose that answer and you move on. The next section is short essay questions. And the word essay there is tricky because I'm a writing teacher. I'm not looking for very long essays. In fact, you don't have space for very long essays. I'm just looking for you to have a detailed response. So about a paragraph, 5 sentences, where you can show both that you know how to answer the question and that you have some ideas about that question. That's the whole point of an essay exam in general. Instructors want to be able to see that you can process through the information and use it in a thoughtful way that shows that you know what this course is doing. So make sure you spend some time writing those essay questions. Okay, so that's the exam. I want to look at the semester project for just a second, and then we will get into the major part of the lecture today. So here's the semester project sheet. As I told you in the very first lecture we had, My students did this project last semester. Some people did some really great work. And one student blew my socks off. I played that song for you by the student. And it wasn't a great recording. Again, I'm learning how to do this video stuff, and I'm not really great at it yet. Unfortunately, you're my guinea pigs. Students in future semesters will be better off. I don't really know how to integrate music or video within a video yet. I mean, I kind of have an idea. I just haven't gotten around to learning how to do it. So I played that song for you in our first video. I'm going to play it again for you, or give you a different version of it so that you can hear it better in the next week or so. But this is your project. This is where that song came from. The student wrote that song. It was a beautiful piece of work. And then she also wrote a short paper to go along with the song to explain what she was thinking. Okay, that was a big introduction. I want to read this assignment to you. And I know you don't need me to read to you. I know you're competent readers, but it's really good, I think, when you have a complex assignment, to hear the assignment come at you from your professor's voice. So here it goes. As part of the requirements for HUM 101, students are supposed to write at least one essay to show that they can use the concepts of humanities to analyze culture and to show that they can develop meaningful academic work. So a lot of times this course can seem like it's just about watching videos or looking at pieces of art or listening to music, and it is those things. But the whole point of these things is to learn that humanities is a field of study, and that there are scholars who work in this who do very meaningful work, and you're supposed to practice that. You're supposed to be participating in that as well. So an essay asks you to do those things. An essay asks you to establish a sustained argument that you can prove using evidence drawn from the humanities. But in this class, we're going to define essay broadly to include the processes that one goes about in originating, developing, and producing an essay, even if that essay comes out in some other type of text. This means that for this assignment, you may produce an essay, a PowerPoint, a documentary, a podcast, a wiki, a poster presentation, or any other project that reveals critical thinking, document design, and argument development that might be found in an essay. So this idea is based a little bit in writing theory and the ways that we teach writing. A lot of writing professors at this point in time are expanding what they mean when they say we're going to teach writing. And writing is not just words on a paper in paragraphs with good punctuation. Writing is about the creation of ideas, about establishing an idea and thinking about it rhetorically and thinking about your audience and what they need and thinking about the logic of the text. So I'm taking this word essay and I'm going to use it broadly to allow you to develop some kind of project that will allow you to say something meaningful. I will go to this next sentence because the one example that I gave you was a direct contradiction. You may not produce a poem, a story, a song, or a painting, any art that does not use academic skills. You need to produce an essay. That changed a little bit in the course of the project. I should have clarified that here. The student who wrote the song and the other students who did more creative work also included some kind of academic essay or a mini essay to go along with what they produced to show that they were doing that work. So here's the task. Produce an academic project that analyzes or interprets at least one cultural text that we have covered in class this semester. Number 2, your project must be developed for an audience of interested persons who may or may not be a part of the class, which means you've got to pay attention to how you're presenting this text because they may or may not have read, let's say, the Melian dialogue, or they may not have read the Noah story from the Quran. Number 3, your project must make your object of analysis more meaningful to your audience by showing how and why that object is important to culture. You cannot just simply summarize one of the texts. You've got to do something more. The careful work and thought that goes into work and thought that goes into college level work must be evident in your production. You must make sure your work shows sophisticated thought, careful editing, and hard brain work. You must also make sure your work is academically honest by using adequate citation if necessary. And the citation part is important. You cannot just take words and ideas and arguments offline, off of somewhere online, and put them into your essay without citation. You must use citation, or else you are running into the risk of being accused of academic dishonesty and plagiarism. An essay might be the easiest, most obvious route to go here, but if you feel academically and creatively drawn to other modes of production, go for it. Your project is due in its final form by July 26th at 11:59. We're going to hold workshops on the project in week 6. Here's some ideas. Compare one apocalyptic text from the class to an apocalyptic text that you find on your own. Identify the cultural importance of both texts. Number 2, take 2 versions of a story from different genres, different eras, and different viewpoints and figure out how such factors affect production. Sorry about the dogs. Number 3, show how one of our texts might help us understand the pressures, anxieties, and realities of our current epidemic. Number 4, try to answer philosophical questions about why we love stories of the apocalypse through your analysis of one of our texts. Number 5, focus on a particular identity marker, race, class, gender, sexuality, politics, etc., and develop a study plan for people who identify with that identity. There are many, many options here. These are just a few. I want you thinking both creatively and analytically, and I want you producing something that has substance. If you're interested in doing that creative aspect of the project, I'm certainly happy for you to paint a painting. But you also need to be able to write about what that painting's accomplishing, why it's meaningful. You're welcome to write a comedy routine, but if you're going to do a comedy routine, you should make it clear within that there is academic thought going in within that. Lots of possibilities here. We'll talk more about it. You can use the class talk section to actually talk about some of these ideas to see where you want to go. Okay. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint for this mini lecture, and I'm not going to go very much longer. You've got a lot of stuff on your plate, and I had a whole plan to do kind of a history of nuclear fear-mongering and nuclear war and the effects of it on our culture and how it's affected creative work. And that would be an interesting lecture to do. And if we were in a classroom where we could just do it, I might have presented it. But right now we're in the middle of taking a test. You just got your semester project, and I want you focusing on the text that we presented in the class. So I'm not doing that whole lecture, but I do want to say a couple things. So I went to high school in the 1980s. I started high school in 1982, graduated in 1986. So I'm a little old, I guess. When I was going to high school, actually throughout my entire life, but definitely in the 80s, the awareness of nuclear war was on the top of our conversation. In the same ways that we are talking about Black Lives Matter right now, or the ways that we're talking about a pandemic right now, nuclear war was on the tip of everybody's tongues. And the reason why, of course, was because we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the threat of war was always there. In fact, it was so much there that in high school, we read novels about nuclear war and the effects of nuclear war on the body. We watched movies about nuclear war and the effects of radiation. We had multiple movies that came out in popular culture about nuclear war and survivors after war. Nuclear war was so much on our consciousness that when I was in high school, I lived in Battle Creek, Michigan, which is about halfway between Detroit and Chicago. And in going to school in Battle Creek, I knew how long it would take radiation from the bombs that would certainly be dropped on Chicago and the bombs that would certainly be dropped on Detroit, I knew how long it would take the radiation from those two places to reach me in Battle Creek. And I knew what kinds of radiation would affect me. I knew what it would do to my skin, what it would do to my genetics, what it would do to my hair, what it would do to the people I love. And how did I know this? Well, because it was the topic of conversation. War. Nuclear war. The end of the world. Because there was no doubt about it. In the 1950s, my mom talks about how they talked about nuclear war at that time, which was you hide under your desks and when the bombs start dropping, and then you maybe go home and stay inside for a while, and then you'll be okay. It was quite different by the time the 80s rolled around. By the way, if you're interested in thinking about that expression of nuclear war, you can go to the Henry Ford Museum, and the Henry Ford Museum has an exhibit laid out of a classroom and where those kind of drills, hide under your desks, wait for the bombs to stop dropping, those kind of drills actually took place. War was different when I was when I was in high school, and the threat of war was real. You know, and that threat of war was also combined with other threats, pandemic threats, threats of violence. The idea that AIDS came out when I was in high school, what AIDS was, the awareness of AIDS came out. It was very scary. It may be why I'm interested in the issues of apocalypse, because not only did I have to learn about this fact that I was almost certainly going to die from nuclear radiation. People of my generation kind of grew up with that idea that we were almost certainly going to die from nuclear radiation because the bitterness between the Soviet Union and the United States was so deep. And that bitterness plays a role today. We can still hear people talking about Russians or the Soviet Union, and there's a whole history behind that talk. I forget what I was going to say from that, but it was a part of my childhood, which is why I'm interested in nuclear war. I'm interested in more fun parts of nuclear war, or for more fun parts of the apocalypse, but there's a very real history with me. I'm also interested in issues of war. And for this semester, or this week, I've had you read some stuff on just war theory. Now, I've read a couple of comments already in the discussion, and a couple of comments have referred to the idea that politicians just use this and that it's just an idea of trying to justify what you're doing. And certainly people use terms from just war theory to justify going into another country and killing people. If you go back and look at the ways that George Bush II justified going to war in Iraq, they were trying to follow just war theory. They didn't do it very well, but they were trying to follow just war theory because it is a very real thing. That political use of just war theory is a little bit different than the philosophical use. And a philosopher, when they are developing ideas, and this is part of going to the humanities part of this class, a philosopher, when they're developing ideas throughout the history of the world, the reason why philosophy is developed is both for practical reasons, how do you justify going to war, but also for human interest reasons. What does it mean to declare war? Why does that matter? And how can we know when we declare war what we're doing? So just war theory is a philosophical exercise in what war is. I want to review a couple of things in just war theory. The jus ad bellum is the idea that just war has to happen for a cause, that there has to be a clear intention for war. You can't just decide those Canadians suck, so let's go bomb them. There's got to be a reason, a justifiable reason for war in just war theory. This is if you think about the real effects of this, if the United States just decides to go bomb Canada because Justin Trudeau, the prime minister, is cuter than Donald Trump and we just want to get rid of him, other nations are going to look at that and they're going to judge us and they're going to say that was inappropriate. And their response to us will will be based on whether or not our cause was just. If we have a just cause, Quebec tried to invade New York or Detroit, then maybe we have a reason for going in. But if it's just because our president decides, I want to go to war, let's go to war with Canada, that doesn't work. Now, the reality of the situation is the United States is very powerful. We've got a lot of weapons. People don't want to piss off the United States. So the reality is that just war theory doesn't always work. Sometimes we go to war with no real justification, and the rest of the world just goes, what are you going to do? It's them Americans. But it does have some grounds. And hopefully the reality is at some point, people in this nation have to say, this is not just. There is no real cause. Our intentions are not good. In addition to that, wars have to be held between positions of legitimate authority. So if we decide that we're going to go to war with Canada, we can do that in just war theory because we are a recognized nation and Canada is a recognized nation. It's a legitimate two-sided war. Now, obviously, the United States is much more powerful than Canada, so that there's questions about legitimate authority there. But for the most part, two nations go to war. We cannot go to war against Mexico City. Mexico City is not a nation. It is not a legitimate target. We also can't go to war, declare war against terrorists. Terrorists have no authority, and there is no such thing as the state of terrorism. Now, I know we've lived in the war on terror for a very long time, but it's not a war. And actions that we take within that, we're just trying to justify those actions. But there are no legitimate actions within a war on terror because there's no legitimate counter power. The next part of jus ad bellum is this idea of proportionality. That is, a war that is declared has to be proportional. If we were to decide to go to war with the Bahamas, we can't send our entire Navy down there. That's not proportional. We can't invade the Bahamas and take it over because that's not proportional. We've got to have some sense of recognizing the limits of our own power and the ways that power can destroy. The last thing of jus ad bellum is that it is the last resort, that other methods of avoiding war have been attempted, that you've had discussions, you have tried to intercede, you've used economic means to try to avoid war, and nothing has worked. I want to mention one other thing with cause because I didn't go over it. What is a just cause? Most often, the only just cause for war is in defense of yourself or defense of others. That's basically the only just cause for going to war. That means that the other side, if they are attacking you, may not have just cause. And so you're trying to fix that by having your own just cause by stopping them. Maybe in very limited ways, retribution is a just cause. If in the case of, say, 9/11, if we could prove that Afghanistan actually played an active role in supporting this act of attack on the United States, we can't go to war with terrorists, but we could go to war with Afghanistan. Again, that's in the theoretical range. Whether or not it was justice to do so is a different question. The next part of just war theory is jus ad bellum, that you have discrimination. And by discrimination, that means that you use discrimination in making your decisions, not the racial discrimination, but that you choose appropriate targets. This is the don't target civilians, don't target cities, don't target people who have not attacked you. You have to use discrimination and attack, and within war, and only attack valid targets, which is basically military targets. There's also a question of proportionality in just ad bellum. So just ad bellum is pre-war. Just in bello is during war, and there's a question of proportionality there. What is proportional? How do you know that what you're doing is justified according to your purpose? So let's take this question of attacking another city. If you attack a city, is that proportional? Well, it's certainly not necessarily discriminatory. You're going to kill some civilians if you attack a city. But if the act of killing those civilians leads to a more just peace, if you have to attack a city for whatever reason, and it leads to some kind of just peace, then maybe that attack was justified. We've looked at some images of atomic war as interpreted by survivors of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Was it justified to drop atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in World War II to end the war? There is a jus in bello argument for dropping those bombs. I disagree with it completely. But there was an argument, and the argument was the war needed to be stopped right then and there, or thousands and millions more people were going to die. The war had to end. And so in order to make the war end, the United States did a horrible, violent, destructive thing, dropping atomic bombs. But in killing the people of Nagasaki or Hiroshima, the United States actually ended up saving lives. That's the argument. Then there's also a question of no unethical means, no nerve gas, no landmines in playgrounds, no counter agents that might destroy people's physical bodies in ways that go far past the issue of war. It sounds very weird because you're taking a gun and putting a bullet in somebody. That's ethical, but taking nerve gas and making them cough and destroying parts of their interior body, that's not ethical. It sounds very weird, but there has, in just war theory, there's some level of decision about what is ethical and what's not, and that's usually a community decision made within the world. Finally, jus ad bello has the notion of responsibility, that war is destructive, war is dangerous, war kills, and the actions that you take have to be guided by these previous concepts. And as long as they are guided by those concepts, you actually cannot be held accountable for destruction, for unintended effects. It's a weird concept too, but there's this idea of what you can be held responsible for, because you don't want to defend yourself, go into another country to try to defend yourself and force them to stop, and then do something, and then you become the war criminal. You have to have a sense of responsibility, but ultimately you also have a sense of accountability just for the things that you can actually control. What that means is people who engage in war have to be very careful about the decisions that they make. And while it doesn't seem like it's very careful with chaos and people shooting each other, there's actually some amount of just war planning within war. There's one other element here that was not covered in the reading that you looked at, and that is just postbellum. Just postbellum is a way of thinking about what happens after war. Just ad bellum, before war. Just in bello, during war. Just postbellum, after war. And there is a way to do a just peace. In order to do a just peace, there has to be a plan for a lasting peace. How do you move out of war and into being a neighbor again? Usually that involves treaties and agreements and decisions to help each other. Sometimes reparations, oh, we blew up your total infrastructure, let's help you rebuild that infrastructure. And so part of that just Postbellum is a plan for rebuilding, maybe through finances or maybe through help. The United States actually did some of this in Iraq after we invaded Iraq in 2003. We actually practiced some just Postbellum by helping them reconstruct the country. And then there's also the within just Postbellum, the necessity for answering for war crimes, for not shielding people who commit war crimes, for making sure that people are accountable for those things that they did not need to do, that actually broke the rules of just war theory. It sounds like a bunch of jibber jabber. It sounds like it doesn't make sense. And it sounds like it's just things people would use to justify action. But there's actually a real thought, some real planning, because if you can hold these countries to these terms, what we will see is that there is very little reason for going to war. Very little justification. And the only justification is justification that will save lives. It's a hard concept. This makes it harder. If the world can be destroyed in an instant, how does just war theory ever work? How does war ever work? If the apocalypse can grow out of human action, and we could destroy the world very easily with the amount of nuclear weapons we have, is there anything possible is there any justice that can ever grow out of war? Some of the singers we looked at this week help us answer that question, or help us give us ideas about that question. Some of the readings we had this week help us think about it. I hope you're thinking about it too. And I hope you're thinking also about how these fears, these ideas, these deeply held beliefs lead to human creation that tries to avoid war at all costs. Talk to you next week. Good luck on the exam.